I'm in the Washington, D.C. area where it's still dark, but you guys bring a lot of light. I was particularly pleased to see my old friend Nick Quainer. Uh, I don't think I've ever had a chance to see him that he does not immediately bring a big smile to my face. A very warm and very, very important pioneer for Africa, and for the internet as a whole. I was asked to speak today about collaboration and lessons from the past that might be applied to modern day and to the future. I'll try to say a few words, but I hope and I actually expect that most of what I have to say will be completely familiar to everybody. Um, let's see. So it looks like I have control of the slides. Is that right? People can see? This is good. Very briefly, my history goes back to the very beginnings of the network era. As was mentioned, I sort of by accident of a certain point in time, we started the RFCs, and I wrote RFC 1. I think that's going to be on my tombstone. Nothing else I've ever done will be remembered for as long as that. Definitely not what I would have expected when I was a youngster thinking about what my future was. The ARPANET was conceived in the mid-1960s, and serious work began on it in 1968 and 1969. The first node was installed at UCLA in September of 1969. John Postel, Vince Cerf, and I were all graduate students at UCLA under professors Jerry Estrin and Len Kleinrock. And the initial network consisted of just 4 nodes. SRI, University of California, Santa Barbara, and University of Utah were the other 3. And in the August of 1968, before the work had been done building the IMPs, the router, the original routers, and before any of the lines had been procured for the network, we began to meet each other and think about how we're going to use this network. That resulted in the network working group, which over a long period of time grew and morphed into the Internet Engineering Task Force. The Request for Comment series emerged out of that as a very informal and collegial way of sharing our thoughts about what the protocols should look like. I then interrupted my graduate work to go work directly for the US government at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the office known as Information Processing Techniques Office, a very bureaucratic sounding office. And in that office, it turned out there was a vision of everything that you see today was absolutely part of what that office was thinking about. Very visionary, very long time frame, and funding for artificial intelligence, funding for graphics research, funding for time-shared and interactive systems, advanced programming languages, and of course, networking all came out of that office. A long-term bet that was a long-term investment, I should say, inside of a very smart agency that was formed in response to the Russians putting up the first satellite, which caused quite a reaction inside the US government. Years later, I joined the IETF as the first area director for security, spent some time on the Internet Architecture Board, and then yet later got involved with ICANN, first as the founding chair of the Security Stabilities Advisory Committee, and then joined the board, and over a long period of time, spent 6.5 years as chair of the board. I finished my tenure on the board in 2017, and I have been running a small research operation called the Edgemore Research Institute, very much focused on sorting out who is. I won't say much about that in this talk, although a few words at the tail end, but I thought it would be helpful to give you a brief picture of my involvement over a long period of time. I want to talk about multiple timeframes here. I won't say a lot, but a few things that are worth bringing to your attention. The very early days of putting the ARPANET together was highly collaborative. And it was highly collaborative for very simple reasons. None of us had any reason to compete with each other. The money that was being supporting all of us was coming out of a single source, out of that office. And we all understood that this network was only going to have value if it worked for all of us, if we cooperated to put the pieces together. So we had a strong incentive to cooperate, and we had really no financial motive and no cultural motive to compete or to be adversaries of each other. In those days, the results of research were published openly. There were no intellectual property issues. We shared everything that anybody wanted to know. And out of that original work came what I would say are three very powerful results, all involving different degrees of openness. One is, from a technical perspective, the architecture that emerged, multiple layers of relatively thin layers of protocols, an invitation to build more layers, to go around the existing layers and dig underneath if necessary, or to provide alternatives, made it possible for endless innovation. And endless innovation is what happened. The original focus that we had was the very simple tasks of how do you move a file from one place to another, and how do you log in to a remote machine. But we knew right from the beginning that although those were the initial applications, they certainly were not the last. They were only the beginning. So our attitude was that we were not building a product in the usual sense. We were building more of a toolkit. Second and third parts of this were social. Anybody was allowed to participate. There was no limitation. We started with a very small number of people from these first 4 sites, but very quickly, over a period of time, others joined and were entirely welcome. And the last of this was not only open participation, but open access to all the documents. I cannot begin to tell you how important that is. We had not, at least I had not, been involved in standards efforts previously, and I really had no appetite for getting involved in the bureaucracy, even though, as my life has turned out, I now spend too much of my time doing that sort of thing. But it felt very comfortable and natural to us that everything we were doing should be open, and not only open to each other who were involved in the creating these documents, but open to anybody, anywhere, anytime, all over the world. And indeed, there are many anecdotes. I have some, my brother has some, and I know that there are many, many other anecdotes where the mere fact that these documents have been available online anytime, free of charge, around the world, has resulted in initiatives that we either stumble upon, or some of them become very visible, but in any case, empower people everywhere. I made my first trip to India in 1994 to Bangalore. I visited, among other places, the Indian Institute of Science. And after I gave a talk there, I was introduced to a graduate student and was shown a rather amazing amount of software that he had put together. And I asked him, well, how did he do that? He said they just downloaded the RFCs and read them and put the pieces together. Very, very powerful. Well, the ARPANET was a single network, and it was limited in the sense that the only way to become part of that was to receive funding from DARPA, from the US government. That did not grow. It was immediately obvious that there had to be a way of having multiple independently operated networks. Uh, and so the organization of AFNOC, for example, although we didn't focus on Africa per se at that moment, but the idea that there would be multiple networks and that there would be organizations of networks regionally and in other ways was clear from a very early stage. So from a technical perspective, it was important to design a way of interconnecting independently operated networks. This is what the essence of the internet is. Bob Kahn and Vint Cerf led the way, did technical designs and the political activities of organizing the funding and promulgating the ideas. It was not a simple, straightforward activity. There were competition from another group of folks who wanted to design things from the top down, the OSI protocol suite. And in the end, the TCP IP suite of protocols won the day. As part of the huge expansion from a network of a few dozen nodes to an uncountable number now, excuse me, measured undoubtedly in the millions, and serving instead of hundreds or a few thousand people, serving literally billions of people. We had expansion in every respect. Just the simple task of naming the nodes turned out to be a big deal. In the early days, we used names like 1, 2, 3. Very quickly, we added acronyms, UCLA, SRI, etc. But it became clear that this needed to be expanded quite a bit. That led to the creation of the domain name system. And as part of that, the big question of, well, how do you organize those names? John Postel had spent the bulk of his life focused on the RFCs and the internet architecture and worked with Paul Motkapetris on the domain name system. The big decision, one of the big decisions, was that every country should have a top-level domain. And very cleverly, he avoided having to make up names for each of the countries and made use of the United Nations system, which is closely related to two-letter postal codes with the two-letter codes for each country. Down the line, many years later, there was an introduction, as you are undoubtedly aware, of so-called internationalized domain names that accommodated other scripts beyond the basic ABCD type names, the so-called Latin scripts. As I was preparing these notes, I remembered that Egypt was actually the first country that got a internationalized domain name. A big event, very, very well received. Creation of the internet had, as I know every one of you has lived through, a huge impact. Telephone connections prior to the internet were extremely expensive and were controlled by the national telephone companies under a set of treaties, basically, through the ITU. And it would cost dollars per minute, and sometimes many dollars per minute, to make a long-distance phone call around the world. I don't know how many of you remember those days, but you would make appointments and you would have to watch how much time you were using and so forth. Today, obviously, it's a huge reduction in cost. I'm talking to you in my youth. If I had tried to give this kind of talk at this point, it would have required a budget allocation as opposed to a few messages from old friends saying, could I give a talk? Half the world is now connected, roughly. Only about 1/3, I think, in the case of Africa. So there is one could look at that as a glass partly full or partly empty. I think the positive way to look at that is that there is enormous opportunity for expansion and innovation and creation of new opportunities in Africa. One of the concerns that I think is undoubtedly very much on your minds, and I can assure you that it is equally on the minds of all of us who have been involved in developing the network over time, is avoidance of the colonialism activity. A lot of investment that has been made in Africa and a lot of the development in Africa in years past has been from the developed countries making investments or in earlier days, of course, conquering and controlling the people and the governments in Africa. Fortunately, almost all of that sort of stuff is behind us, but there's still an issue about how much local control versus external control there is. One of the things that I think we in the networking business can be very proud of, and that has turned out to be very important, is that we wanted the control of the networks in each country to be done by the people in those countries. One particular aspect is that one of the RFCs, RFC 1591 by John Postel in 1994, talking about the domain name system, the structure of the names, and the delegation of top-level domains, contains a very simple and short sentence that there must be an administrative contact and a technical contact for each domain, and then saying for top-level domains that are country codes, at least the administrative contact must reside in the country involved. Very straightforward, very simple. I can tell you that we've actually had occasion to pay attention to that particular sentence. I was on the board of ICANN in starting from a pretty early time, from 2003 until 2017, and there came a moment when a new country was created, or a new top-level domain. It was slightly complicated. The Netherlands had decided that they were going to change the administrative structure for the islands in the Caribbean that were part of its Commonwealth, and a new country code was assigned to one of the islands, and the island people were very, very eager to make this happen extremely quickly. They acquired the services of a very good guy, technically competent, very helpful in Europe. And when it came time to write down who was the administrative contact, his name was there. Came up to the ICANN board for what should have been a very straightforward, almost pro forma approval of that. And one of the people on the board, and I'm pleased to say he was an African, Katim Touré from the Gambia, said, wait a minute. It says here that the administrative contact has to be inside the country. Caused us to stop and say, you know, you're right. We cannot approve this as is. And we had to respond that the country had to choose somebody who was physically inside the country. There was a short period, measured, I think, in days, maybe a couple of weeks, of urgent back and forth. But eventually, that change was made. And I think we all felt very good that the concept, that the principle that was written down many years earlier was invoked and brought into action here. Well, that's a very limited picture of some of the things in the past. A short while ago, Sally Wentworth, President and CEO of the Internet Society, in July, gave a talk, which I suspect at least some of you were at, and included a number of statistics, and she graciously has allowed me to make use of the points that she made. So here are some statistics that she shared about the state of Africa's network ecosystem at the moment. 10 operator groups, peering forums, 57 internet exchange points, 62 government networks, numerous community networks, and a very large number of organizations that rely on network resources that are managed across Africa by Afrinic. This is both a great achievement, great start, and also lays the foundation for much more to come. Now we have to talk about the other kind of things. What goes wrong in these situations? Well, I think we have instances of problems which you are all familiar with in various ways. I've listed here financial stability, technical resilience, community control of governance, with Afrinic being probably the most visible and important one at the moment, and bandwidth and connectivity issues, particularly in the interior. We have seen from time to time cable cuts, some of which are known to be purely accidental, some of which are less clear about whether they were or were not accidental. But in any case, making the point that it's not sufficient to simply have a connection from one point to another. One needs redundancy and enough capacity to route around failures. I'm only partially familiar with the ecosystem of the connectivity in Africa, but I know that submarine cables around the outside of Africa, around the coast, it provides connectivity for many of the countries that have coastal connections. The interior is another matter, but I understand that there have been huge developments there. My last trip to Africa was at the ICANN meeting in Rwanda, and I can tell you that it felt the same as being anywhere else. You could sit down and be connected cleanly, quickly, and very efficiently to any other place in the world. There have been instances of government shutdowns at a country level when there's been contention or civil unrest inside of a country. We do not like to see that, but there's not a whole lot that anybody outside the country can do about that if a country genuinely decides to cut itself off from the rest of the internet, except that when a country is sufficiently interconnected, not just with one or two connections, but with a sufficient number of interconnections to its neighbors and to other points, it becomes much more difficult to disconnect an entire country. That is a useful lesson, and one of the ways of measuring how far along the development path a particular country is with respect to internet connectivity. Let me now move briefly to kinds of things to think about going forward. Going back to our original experience about the development of the ARPANET and then the internet, one of the major lessons is how important it is to form alliances. The regional internet registries and ICANN operate on a world scale and provide excellent forums for cooperation. The regional alliances of which AFNOG is obviously all important in Africa, is absolutely vital. There would be no network in Africa if it were not for the network operators, quite obviously. I don't know on a day-to-day basis how much cooperation and how much competition there is. There is always, because there are human beings involved, a degree of both competition and cooperation. It's the nature of the human condition, I think. I would counsel that it's important to ask for help, to resist external control, and to provide help to others whenever possible. Those are the bedrock of being successful in this world. I would also counsel that reach out and interact with the rest of the world, invite experts in, send students to other places, create recognition of talent pool, create schools, create badges or certificates of accomplishment, and raise as much as possible the technical and the administrative, bureaucratic, political, organizational talents in Africa to build a very, very strong basis. I would counsel also to develop metrics and goals. I've mentioned a couple of statistics on a very gross level about the percentage of connectivity in Africa. There are many other ways of measuring the state of affairs and the progress, and to use those as a way of setting what the goals are. One can also divide the goals along, look at them in two separate ways. One is how much participation, how much capacity, etc. And the other is how resistant is the entire system to outages or other kinds of problems, how strong and robust it is. So I would counsel that there should be metrics of both kinds and goals set in both kinds. Let me emphasize again and again how important local control is. Local control means that the people who are affected are also in charge. And it's important not only to have a political basis for local control, but facts of life are that if you don't have the money in the bank to support the activity, then you're in trouble from the beginning. So there has to be a strong financial basis for each of the pieces of the operation. All of this is in the hands of the people who know what networks are about, who know how to build networks, how to operate networks, how to serve their customers. Also, obviously, very, very important is to educate the people who are being served and the political leaders who are in charge of the laws and the operation of the governmental, not only at the national level, but local levels as well. So educate governments. They are necessary, and done correctly, government people are your friend. I mentioned in my early part of my career that I interrupted my graduate work to go work in the U.S. government, in the Department of Defense. I was a civil servant and had a top secret clearance, and got to work every day with colleagues deep in the bureaucracy of the government. And I found that to be an extremely positive experience. Everyone I worked with was committed to trying to provide the best possible use of the resources that we had available, and to pursue the overall vision and to support the people who were doing the real work. We were deeply conscious that it wasn't us sitting in government offices who were making things happen. We were simply enabling others to do the work. And I think that largely around the world, that is an attitude that anybody who serves in government, particularly if they're doing it not as a somebody seeking to have power for themselves, but seeking to be helpful to their community and to their colleagues will have. So that is the essence of what I would share with you today. Um, I mentioned at the outset that I'm now spending my time focused on the who is problem, is where the access to the registration data associated with domain names. Um, our small effort is gathering some force, and I'm hopeful that it will not only become visible, but that at another time, perhaps next year, have some opportunity to interact with some of you, perhaps in this forum or in other forums, about the progress being made there. So with that, let me say thanks, and again, express my appreciation for being asked to speak with you today. I'm available if anybody wants to ask questions. I'm available by email if anybody wants to follow up. And I wish you a very positive and successful experience with your conference. Thank you.